Welcome to Wild Pursuits with Cross Trail Outfitters, where we guide the next generation to Christ through the outdoors. Join us around the campfire as we share stories of faith, courage, and adventure. All right, guys. I want to welcome everybody to today's podcast. I got Josh East here, our Manteo outfitter with Cross Trail Outfitters here in North Carolina. You're in for a treat, okay? You got somebody like Josh here. He's got a heart of gold, but he's ornery. That's what I like, because I'm the same type of person. So you're in for a treat. What I'm hoping you guys are going to tell today, today's podcast, is understanding what somebody's calling is and really truly what that's about. Josh has got a fascinating story. He may not view it as fascinating, but I think it's fascinating. Josh has been an encouragement for me in my walk with Christ and in my walk in CTO. And really, Josh came along about the same time as, fairly the same time as I did. The first time I met you, we were in Marshfield, Missouri, in a metal building with a bunch of other guys just pursuing God and just pursuing CTO and seeing what God has for us. So, Josh, what I would like to hear, I know everybody out there would like to hear just kind of your story, how God brought you to CTO, how he worked with you in your life to get you to the point of acknowledging the call to CTO. And you have intermixed Cross Trail Outfitters with lots of other ministries, and you've been able to change people's lives through CTO, but through your coffee shop, your calling and how you minister to other people, the relationships that you develop. So I believe you got a fascinating story. I know that people out there would love to hear more about that. So tell us kind of your beginning and just how CTO came into your life.
Well, it started probably about a year after I got saved. I was a senior in college. I went to App State, and I started hiking the woods, and I just wanted to be outside, be alone, away from the world. And there was one day, I was hiking this trail I always hike, middle of nowhere, and I heard the Lord say, one day you're going to be taking boys and men in these woods, and they're going to encounter me like you are. And so that stuck with me. I sort of just, I put it on the shelf, but it really, if you hear the voice of God, if you hear, what the Holy Spirit's saying to you, those words just stick to you. Yeah. And so that was back in like 2003, 2004.
It was before the gray hair.
Oh yeah. That was before CTO was even, North Carolina, before I ever lived out here. Yeah. And then, so that was probably 10 years prior, close to it. And so, I heard Mike Johnson talking about this new ministry, because it wasn't in North Carolina at that time. And I heard him talking about it. I overheard him at church, talking to someone else.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that. All right, that's cool.
And so I heard him talk about it, and I was like, huh. And so something just started going off on the inside. What it was bearing witness of what happened probably 9-10 years prior. And so, and that's what you've probably seen, that sort of that wrestle maybe in Missouri. It wasn't really a wrestle. It was like I knew what the Lord had called me to do, and this was like a vehicle. It was like,
trying to figure out how it all fit together.
Yeah. And so that's how it sort of got started. I mean, it wasn't out here. It was nothing but a vision here in North Carolina. Yeah, I mean, it literally. And so we started from ground zero out here doing a couple summer camps, and then when I heard about that, went to Missouri for a weekend, met a lot of different people, and just to see if it was a fit or what it was really all about. Yeah. But it really happened 10 years prior.
Yeah. That's an amazing connection that I think sometimes we look back in our lives and see see where God revealed something to us, but we really didn't maybe acknowledge that God revealed it to us. But your ability to understand that was how the Holy Spirit was connecting what He gave you 10 years prior almost to putting it together in CTO. And what a lot of people wouldn't know and understand in CTO, like you said, it was just a twinkle in our eye at that time. It wasn't really in North Carolina at that time. What does that look like? And you've got an icon like Mike Johnson who's coming to you, and you're hearing him say these things, and you're like, what is this Cross Trail Outfitters? And for you to take that step of faith to go to Missouri, not everybody would do that.
Yeah, Mike just, and Mike didn't know what it looked like really either. I mean, it was all fresh to us, but we knew, we just knew there was a connection of getting boys in the outdoors, because I mean that's where we encountered the Lord in such a powerful way, and how can we, bring it to this area? What does it look like? I mean, the nuts and bolts come later and everything, but it all starts with that vision and knowing. Because I always tell people at times, other outfitters, I said, regardless if CTO was here or not, I would be doing the same thing.
You've always told me that for years.
Yeah.
Regardless of where CTO is, you would be here ministering to boys, taking them into the outdoors, and introduce them to a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I think you said something that just, when you said it, it really spoke out to me. When you said when you felt the calling, it was a no-brainer to put boys in the woods to do this because that's how God worked with you. Mm-hmm. So obviously early on in your life, God was not only speaking to you, but it seemed like was He speaking to you when you were in settings like this, or was He in the woods on a deer stand, over a stream, or how was God always speaking to you back when you were younger?
Yeah, well, when I was younger, I mean, I went to church here and there. I didn't really know. When I was in college, when I gave my heart to Jesus in that condo, little downstairs bathroom by myself, I needed help, and so then I was in the mountains up there. I went hiking or walking through the woods all the time. I'm talking like 5 days a week, like for 5 miles at a time, just like settings like we're at now.
You're a mountain man, even though you live in a place like this.
And so, and there's where I learned to hear the voice of God. I heard what was going on in here. Like, I needed away from the distractions of the world, where I can, for a season, that I could hone in and the beauty, love the book, Wild at Heart, all those different things, Lord starts speaking. All that is His voice talking, and it's just communion. It was just an intimacy that was just fostered, hiking those trails. And
did you recognize it then, at that time, early on, what that was?
I was thinking it was. I mean, this is, there's no book manual to. So sometimes it was trial and error. It was like, is that the voice of God? Is that God talking to me? I used to test it out, living, we're driving to work, for example. At one point, I would ask the Lord or the Holy Spirit, I was like, which way do I go? Well, you need to go this way. Don't go this way. It's going to take you a lot longer. And so I would go that way, perfectly clear, traffic's clear, none of that. Other times he would say go this way, but I'd go the other way.
And then what happened?
Then I would be stuck in traffic, or there would be a wreck or an accident or something, and I'm like, I should have listened to that knowing. But what He was teaching me, I was learning to trust that knowing by little examples like this, like that. Go to this. I mean, we still do it on our outings today. I said, I want you to ask the Lord where He wants you to go hunt. Just don't go to that spot. Here's an example. We did this with the boys and on a turkey hunt. You'll love this one. On a turkey hunt, and we try not to ever get in a rush or hurry. And so we're doing devotions in the morning. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. And the world says you got to get out there before the light comes and all this. And we're sitting, we're going to be led by the Spirit of God. And so we have the boys, we ate some breakfast, we're sitting around the table, and we're learning about being led. And I said, all right, boys. And I had an older boy who's been with me a bunch. I said, I want you to go where the Holy Spirit leads you. And so we went out and left that morning after. I mean, you could see the boys chomping at the bit. They're looking like, Mr. Josh, it's way past time. I said, the Lord can put you at the right place at the right time. And so we went out. Older boy, his name was Cole. He been with me a bunch. I trusted him. I knew he could. And so he went this direction. And all of a sudden, within 7 minutes, boom! He comes back with this turkey, like a 10, 11-inch beard, spurs over his back. His eyes were just bright. And I said, I said, Cole, what can we want? And so all the other boys came back too. We're all gathered back at the cabin. I said, I want you to take us to your spot. And so he took us down. We walked where he was, and I said, show us what you did. He said, well, Lord led me down here, and I sat at this tree. He said, right when I sat down, all of a sudden I hear something over the fence, a turkey. He said, it runs down the fence, jumps 2 barbed wire fences, jumps a creek, and stops 10 feet in front of me, and I shoot and drop it.
Oh, and not one call, not
one call, not nothing.
Yeah,
and
wow.
And I said, Cole, do you know what this spot is? I said, the outing before we came here, we put out prayer benches.
And that was one of them.
And he was sitting at the prayer bench. We just put out the outing before.
He didn't know that.
He didn't know that.
Wow.
And so all that to say, I learned that voice, and I want boys to learn that, being out in the woods, and so it just carries over into every area. So I always tell them, I said, we hunt with grace and we fish with grace. It ain't fair.
Yeah, those fish and what you're hunting, they're doomed.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that is a great example, Josh, of just how one leading you, the Holy Spirit prompting you to teach that to the boys, and for them to then go take that and to actually implement that.
Yeah.
And then the Lord allowed that to happen to show that young man and you and everybody on that outing. And now, telling this story right now, I've heard stories, just so you all know that's listening, this is not just a one-time story with Josh East, okay? There's stories like this of you're just saying, we just go and we just hunt. We're not worried about which blind, which stand. And
we're not the best hunter. We're
Yeah.
not the best
Yeah.
fisherman.
Yeah. See, and I come from the avenue of I'm an outfitter, and I analyze and look and scout and check it out and have it planned, and I set that blind, and it's the most beautiful thing if you put that blind up in the right place and that kid harvests that deer. And not saying the Holy Spirit can't lead me to do that too, but we have a tendency, and we talk about this all the time on our conference call and stuff, about if we're not careful as men, we put so much time into that outfitting side of what we do because we love it. We love it. It's an excuse, if you will, to get out in the woods or get in that boat or get in that blind to do some of those things. However, I think if we're not careful, we're not listening to the Holy Spirit if we're not careful with that. And that's an amazing example and another life-changing moment for Cole and for those other boys to see that. That's powerful. That's very powerful. Well, let's now go back. Okay, so you obviously you've been in CTO now. What did we decide?
I think
13 years.
Yeah.
You've been in CTO for almost 13 years, or around 13 years. After you accepted that call and you begin to see what that looked like, take us to kind of just what happened from there. Because, I mean, you had life. I mean, you were having kids and you got businesses.
We built a house. I knew we did a couple summer camps. That's sort of how we started. And I was like, how do we do this all the time? And at the time I was working for my father-in-law on the roofing company. Worked for him for like 5 years and stuff, but I knew that I was supposed to do this all the time. And so we had to raise support. We had come up with some root partners. Is what we did,
Yeah.
and so I would I'd pray. I was like, because we're like missionaries set up in our community, and the ministry we're relationship based. So we had to build relationships, and we wanted, the boys. We have relationships with them, relationships with our root partners. It's all based on this relationship. So we're like missionaries set up in the community, and so I would ask the Holy Spirit who to connect with us, and go. And I would see different faces that day, and I'd run into them, and then and so we'd talk to them, and then we got root partners, and we were just sharing the vision of it and everything, and really that root partner development, we did it within 2 months.
I remember that. I remember you going through
This
that.
was, and 2 months, and we're doing outings. We're learning about outings and camps and
Trial by fire.
yeah,
In
pretty
some
much.
cases.
And
Especially back then.
it was definitely back then, because he had us bringing a vision of something, and that's when we really heard the term. We talked about on a conference call, guiding the next generation of Christ to the outdoors. When Brian Utep was with it, and when that came,
that was his vision when he changed that. Absolutely.
And that is what really stuck. And then so I was still working we just had built a house. I just had my first son, Caleb, who's now 13, and I went away for the weekend. He used to be an outfitter named Joe Woodward.
Oh, yeah. Good old Joe.
Good old Joe. We went to the mountains for a weekend, and just a little men's getaway, just so we could clear our heads and think. And I was sitting by up there in the mountains. It was a lake, and I was at a lake, and I'm saying this always happens. It was just one of those. Heard the voice. We was actually on the trail where I heard God say. We went back to that trail, and the Lord's, this leaf fell from a tree, and the Lord said, "Now it's time to, just like that leaf left this season of life and is floating on this lake of my grace. Now it's time for you to leave this season and rely upon my grace."
Oh, wow. I love that.
And so I left that. I came back on a Sunday. Monday, went back to work. At lunchtime, Hannah, my wife, we went and had lunch together. And she looked at me and said, "When are you leaving?" And which I knew it was time for me to give my notice to my father-in-law.
Which that's probably a whole other story.
But the Lord sort of prompted. She knew this was going to happen, and so after lunch that day, I went and gave my 2 weeks notice. After lunch that day, and I'm telling you, Kurt, the root part. As soon as I gave my notice that we're going to step into what God's called us to do, all these thoughts go through it. You got a mortgage, you got a kid, you got this, and all this stuff was taking place, and as soon as that, I kept getting phone call after phone call of root partners, one after another. Wow. That very day, $300 worth of root partners came in, all by being led by the Spirit of God. He's called you. I always say His will, His bill.
Oh yeah.
And so that's how that sort of transition.
That is see, I get all pumped up and jazzed up just hearing that story in itself. That is a classic example of once. I think sometimes God just asks us to be obedient, and I'm a guy that tends to, and you know this because I've spoke with you about this before. Especially back in the day, I'm a lot better about it now. But not having to go at the time when this opportunity, you put your notice in. Basically that day, you didn't wait. Let me go pray on it for a few weeks. Let me go do this. You knew the Holy Spirit. You knew what the Holy Spirit was telling you, and He revealed that to Hannah too. Mm-hmm. And I believe God never tells two different things. Part of my calling as CTO, Jennifer has been with me through the beginning, and she knew when Brian Utech walked into my house, she knew at that moment and that time, She just said, this is it. She didn't even know what CTO is.
Right.
The Holy Spirit told her, this is it, and this is what you're doing the rest of your life. So that's a classic example of for you to be obedient at that moment, and then God rewarded you with that obedience and started providing instantly. It doesn't mean it always happens that way, but in your case, that's a big encouragement, just to be obedient to your calling, and God took care of those things.
Yeah, and he, it didn't even feel like I have to. That's the thing that's the cool thing about God and His grace. For me, it was like the whole desire changed. It was a desire. I have a desire to do. I know He put a desire in there. It wasn't like, oh my God, maybe leaving whatever company's not for everybody. I don't know, but when that desire changes, it's
time to change.
You just know there's just a grace there that. I mean, looking back now, I couldn't control. I had to let go, but it's the safest I've ever felt. Like, let's say, as a man or whatever, has a family, financially providing. Like, I had no other option but to depend on the Lord. You never really know what you believe till you have to.
Isn't that interesting? I think that is part of why it is important that we do raise our own support.
Oh, absolutely.
Relying on Him to provide, and that step of obedience, but then relying on Him, and in some case, in the beginning days especially, paycheck to paycheck, month to month, week to week, and there is something so powerful about seeing the hand of God take care of that. One of my stories, a brief story of coming into CTO, I had literally had a time frame that I had put. I'm kind of bad about putting ultimatums on God. I don't recommend that at all. But I had put kind of a time frame on some things financially with group partners. And the savings had ran out. Everything had changed. And I broke down with the Lord and a mentor and friend of mine, and said, I don't know what to do. And he looked at me, he said, Kirk, do you doubt your calling, that this is what you're supposed to do? I said, I do not doubt it. He said, well, you just maintain the course. Mm-hmm. And that was a weekend. The following Monday, I go to my mailbox, and literally first grant, first donation, a significant amount, like $10,000+ boom, in that mailbox. Yeah. And I remember opening that up and just breaking down, because it was God showing me that, see, I got you. Mm-hmm. I got you. And there is something about, sometimes God does have a flair for the dramatic sometimes, I think, but I really don't think that's Him per se. I think it's us because of that lack of faith. So that's a huge encouragement for me. I think it'd be a great encouragement. There's a lot of people that would be listening to this that are just wondering, are they hearing the voice of God? And what does that look like? And I think many times we don't. When we come to a crossroads, we don't ask. That's it for part 1 of our conversation with Josh East. Be sure to tune in next week for episode number 2, where we continue our discussion about faith, the outdoors, and the impact of Cross Trail Outfitters. In the meantime, if you'd like to support our mission or get involved, visit teamcto.org. Links are in the description. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time around the campfire with Wild Pursuits.